Hi everybody and welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be looking at Othello by Shakespeare and we're going to be talking about Act 3, Scene 3, or at least the first part of it up until about line 90 or so. In terms of what's happened in the play so far, we've had the elopement of Desdemona and Othello. They have travelled into a storm, into battle against the Turkish fleet. The storm has destroyed that Turkish fleet without any battle needing to happen, and so they've pitched up on Cyprus with all of the other characters that have moved from Venice as well. Iago has become the spider, weaving his web of deceit around the characters, and then we've had the celebration of the wedding and the defeat of the Turkish forces, and that celebration has turned into chaos because Iago has caused Cassio to be involved in a drunken brawl in the street. Now Cassio has lost his job, and at the start of today's scene he's having a private conversation, note that, a private conversation with Desdemona about how he can get his job back. So that's where we're at in a minute, and we're going to think about a big question as we usually do, and that question is, how does Shakespeare present Desdemona's changing character? Remember, instead of getting caught up all of the time in the intricate detail of the play and just being so immersed in Shakespeare's language, we forget about the big picture. We always need to be taking a step back and looking at a panorama of the play and thinking, how is Shakespeare developing the themes? How is he commenting on society and the big questions that were prevalent in the culture of the day? Let's get started then. So at the beginning of Act 3, Scene 3, as I've said, Desdemona and Cassio are having a quiet conversation. Amelia's standing there and she's organised for them to have this conversation, and Amelia has been under Iago's instructions. So even though Iago's not on the stage, as the audience we have this awareness that because he controls Amelia, and Amelia has clearly organised this conversation, that Iago's web of deceit is wrapping itself around these two characters. So Cassio says that he wants his job as lieutenant back, and Desdemona says, "Do not doubt that. Before Amelia here, I give thee warrant of thy place," as in, I will guarantee you that you will get your job back. Assure thee, so be assured, be confident. If I do vow a friendship, I'll perform it to the last article. So if I promise something, I will do it. Very similar to what Lady Macbeth says, actually, that if she'd promised to dash the brains of a baby out, that she would carry it out. There's an interesting echo there from Lady Macbeth. Anyway, then Desdemona says, "My lord shall never rest. I'll watch him tame and talk him out of patience. His bed shall seem a school, his board a shrift. I'll intermingle everything he does with Cassio's suit." So what she means here is that she is going to talk to Othello constantly about giving Cassio his position back. So whether he's in bed, obviously this is a newly married couple, whether he's at his board, so having a meal, everything he does is going to be mingled, is going to be mixed in with thoughts about Cassio. And Desdemona thinks that this is the right thing to do, and that this will help Othello be convinced that Cassio is the right person to promote back to a position of lieutenant. So she says, "Be merry, be happy, Cassio, for thy solicitor," so the person who's representing you to Othello, by that she means herself, "for thy solicitor shall rather die than give thy cause away." Interesting words there. She would rather die than give up on getting him his job back. Like some of the things that Othello has said earlier in the play, when he said, if after every tempest came such calms, and so on, what she says here actually is foreshadowing the fact that she will die because of this. That is what's going to happen in the play. And this speech reveals Desdemona's naivety. She thinks that talking to Othello constantly about Cassio is going to persuade him, whereas actually it's going to make Othello think that she's in love with Cassio. So zooming in a little bit more, these lines here, "Assure thee, if I do vow a friendship, I'll perform it." So this shows her loyalty to Cassio and to her friends, her integrity. If she promises something, she will carry it through, and her honour as well. And it reminds us that as a character, she's very admirable, she's very confident in herself as well. And this confidence is shown in the next line, "My lord shall never rest." So she is quite prepared to convince her husband. Now remember, in the patriarchal society that we're looking at here, a woman wasn't supposed to tell her husband what to do. A woman wasn't supposed to take the lead in a situation. But earlier on in the play, Cassio has shown that this is what the relationship between Desdemona and Othello is like. Cassio has called Desdemona our captain's captain, as in Desdemona is the captain of Othello. She tells him what to do. She's in charge of this relationship. And she seems quite confident and self-assured about this here. And she doesn't think that this would be in any way annoying or irritating to Othello. So she's going to go ahead with this plan. It's interesting, just as a side note here, that she says, "My lord shall never rest." Lots of other characters use quite derogatory language about Othello. So Iago, for example, calls him the Moor constantly, unless Othello is actually on stage. So it's just interesting to note the words that characters use to name each other in the play. And then towards the end of this little section, we see how passionate and determined she is. The fact that she's prepared to promise that she will die rather than let this go. And of course here, what we also notice is that Desdemona isn't attempting to deceive anybody. So Emilia is on the stage. Now, later in the play, Desdemona's relationship with Emilia changes significantly, but at this point, they don't really know each other. Emilia is Desdemona's servant. Desdemona doesn't have any sense of Emilia's loyalty to her. So it's not like Desdemona's thinking, this is my best friend, Emilia, standing here. I can say whatever I like in front of her. I can start to have fall in love with someone else in front of this person because she will never betray me. That's not what this relationship is like. This relationship is a kind of it's designed by Othello. My wife needs a servant. Emilia is a convenient person to be that servant, and it's not a close friendship. So imagine this scene really as Desdemona promising to help Cassio in public. She doesn't have any idea that anyone would interpret this as being in any way an intimate scene or looking like they're having an affair. But of course, that is how Iago presents this scene to Othello. So let's have a look here. Iago and Othello start to come on the stage, and Cassio says, "Oh, I don't want to talk to Othello right now. I'm going to leave." So he slips off, looking quite surreptitious and quite sneaky. He sneaks off to the side, and Iago says, I like not that." Othello says, "What dost thou say?" So Iago's kind of mumbled this line, "Oh, I don't like that very much." He's kind of said this is a throwaway comment, not intended to be heard by Othello at all. And Othello says, "What?" Because he wants to know a little bit more about this. And Iago says, "Nothing, my lord," or "if I know not what." He's pretending to diminish the importance of Cassio's exit. But Iago's pretended reluctance is actually what hooks Othello in. And Iago's hesitancy and his pausing and his lack of confidence in what he's saying, or at least his pretended lack of confidence in what he's saying, gets Othello's interest. And he says, "Was not that Cassio parted from my wife?" So Iago says, "Cassio, my lord? No, sure, I cannot think that he would steal away so guilty-like, seeing you coming." So Iago's saying, "I don't think that would be Cassio. Cassio wouldn't act like that. He wouldn't look guilty." And Othello says, "I do believe it was he." And then Desdemona comes up and says, "How now, my lord? I have been talking with this suitor here." So how are you, Othello? "I've been talking to someone who's asking for help here. I've been talking to Cassio here." So digging down into this a little bit more, if you look at the way Iago speaks all the way through Act 3, Scene 3 and Act 3, Scene 4, he's using very nuanced language to suggest rather than tell. And if you think about any time that you've ever tried to manipulate a situation or to convince anybody, it's much more effective to make suggestions to people. You often hear the old stereotype of a wife saying that she, wants a new car, she wants a particular holiday, but her husband won't do it unless he thinks it's his own idea. So in that context, the wife might drop hints, they might leave brochures lying around the house or whatever. And obviously that's quite a sexist stereotype, but it is one that's quite common in our culture. Or you might think that you want to convince your teacher that you want, a particular reward on the last day of term. So you might drop hints, but you know that if you say to your teacher, "I think we should watch that particular film on that day of term," the teacher's just going to say no outright, aren't they? And it's much more effective to drop little hints. So that's what Iago's doing here. And look at that choice of words there, "steal away." So what he means there is that Cassio's gone away quietly, but the fact that he chooses the word steal with all its connotations of deception, of being surreptitious, really conjures up images of Cassio's of how untrustworthy Cassio is, and we shouldn't kind of miss the particular details of small words in Shakespeare's choice of language. And guilty like again conjures up an idea that Cassio has done something wrong when actually all he's been doing is talking to Desdemona. And then if we look at this final line here, Desdemona plays into Iago's hands, and so much of the action of the play happens because Desdemona doesn't understand. She's naive. She doesn't realise that Othello could become jealous. Remember, Desdemona's lived a very sequestered, a very sheltered life in Venice. She's been kept at home by her father to be prepared for marriage to a very nice young man with lots of money. And so she's probably not very aware of social etiquette. And so she goes right up to Othello and says, "Hi, I've been talking to Cassio," which is exactly what Othello doesn't want to hear. And then they have a little conversation, and Desdemona talks a lot about how she wants Othello to speak to Cassio and to sort this problem out. And Othello eventually says, "I will deny thee nothing. You can have whatever you want. Whereon I do beseech thee, grant me this, to leave me but a little to myself. So I'll give you anything you want as long as you leave me alone." And a little bit offensive, perhaps, Desdemona says, "Shall I deny you? No, farewell, my lord." So she says, "Well, of course, I'll do that, and goodbye." Now, imagine this is a newly married couple. Earlier on in the play, Othello has called her all sorts of wonderful words. "My soul's joy" is one that really sticks in the mind. And now he's saying, "Can you just leave me alone? Stop talking to me." So she is a little bit irked by that, and he says, "Farewell, my Desdemona, I'll come to thee straight. So goodbye, I'll see you in a little bit, I'll come and find you." And so Desdemona turns to Emilia and they leave, and she says, "Be as your fancies teach you, whatever you be, I am obedient." So essentially she's saying, do what you like, whatever you fancy, just do that. Whatever you do, I am obedient. I'm not sure whether she realises the implications of that word, obedient, but here she is pledging to be the stereotypical wife. So if we think about our big question, how does Shakespeare present Desdemona's changing character? She enters the scene confident, self-assured, she knows what she's doing, she's confident that she is able to convince her husband to do whatever she wants, and she leaves the scene saying that she's obedient to her husband. So that's quite a significant shift in terms of her character. Let's zoom out a little bit then and think about some of the aspects of tragedy that we see in this scene. Now, if you studied this play as part of the AQA A-level course, you will probably be quite familiar with the different aspects of tragedy. If you're studying this play as part of another course, don't worry, this is not irrelevant, this is not purely for AQA, but it will be more familiar for you if you do that particular course. So AQA provide us with a list of the different aspects of tragedy, which I've put on the screen here, and I've just picked out some of those words which are going to be particularly relevant to this scene. So we have the idea of isolation. So at the end of the scene, Othello isolates himself from his wife. He tells her to leave him alone. And he's not being very communicative with her, and he's kind of withdrawing into himself. So we do see the increasing isolation, not only of the tragic hero, but also of the woman who's going to be the tragic victim. She's travelled all of this way out of the country that she's grown up in, and she wants to be with her husband, and now she's being cut off from him. The concept of the tragic hero is important. We've spoken previously about how the tragic hero should be very noble, he should be a man of great integrity, but also should have a character flaw, sometimes known with the Greek word hamartia. And that character flaw for Othello is his blindness to what Iago is doing, to Iago's manipulation. And we see that played out in this scene, that Iago has stage managed the conversation between Cassio and Desdemona. He has stage managed the timing of his entry with Othello just in time to see Cassio slipping off. And then he's dropping little hints, and Othello is blind to that. We also see then Iago's power would be the next link, and the power of language to convince people, and how ambiguous language is. That verb steal yes, it can mean go away quietly, but it also has those connotations of deception. And so one of the questions that we can ask ourselves in the play is, how do characters use their power? Where does power come from? Is power a physical thing? Or is power, is it to do with kind of your physical strength, with kind of military prowess, as it would be in Macbeth, for example? Or is power about how you use language and how you can control people psychologically, which is what Iago does? We see the treatment of women as well, so that transformation in Desdemona becoming more subservient and submissive towards the end of the scene, as Othello starts to emphasize a more patriarchal aspect to their marriage. And we also have a great sense of waste in this scene, because we've seen the beautiful love between Othello and Desdemona earlier in the play. "Oh, my soul's joy," he says, and he's so passionately in love with her. He doesn't care what other people think. He will declare his love in front of everybody who's there. And that's relationship has so much potential, not just in terms of being kind of beautiful exploration of love at first sight, but also in the sense that Shakespeare is suggesting that there's a different way to live. We don't just have to have a racist society, or a society in which women are subservient to men. Othello and Desdemona's marriage starts off as being one of equality, where they can transgress, they can break down those boundaries between the races and those boundaries between gender and social standing. And there's so much potential in that to change society for the better. And what we start to see in Act 3, Scene 3 is how all of that potential is going to be wasted. All of the great love that they have that was going to break down those barriers is actually going to change, and those barriers are going to be put back up again by Iago. So to help you think about this a bit more, I've got an independent learning task, and I want you to go back through the first 90 lines of this scene and come up with a little quotation to back up the different aspects of tragedy that I've been talking about there, and then an explanation of how those ideas link together. And I've put an example here on the screen for you. So thank you very much for listening to the video, and I hope it was helpful for you. And make sure you check out the next video, where I'll look at the next section of Act 3, Scene 3.